She put a pot on she hair and gone. Them a the first one out on the dam. Basket on she head, bucket in each hand. Hold up on she frack, I wanna she grandson. To the market, them a go. For their morning, the day is dawning. Forgot a crow to give the villagers a warning. Rise and shine, the birds them a sing. All animal take turn as them join in the waking. Cock crow, dog a bark, donkey bray, horse and neigh, even duck a quack.
Even Dr. Kwok. Good night and welcome to Anansi Web Education. With me is President David Arthur Granger, the Cooperative Republic of Guyana. Ran the best years of governance from 2015 until 2020. We can't recall when was the last time Guyana had enjoyed a large degree of calmness in terms of peace amongst people. We hardly saw the extrajudicial killings, lots of things we didn't see, compliments of the coalition government under the presidency of His Excellency David Arthur Granger. Again, thank you so much for those beautiful years after coming through that hurricane of destruction, 23 plus years of hurricane of destruction under the PPP. But we are not here to talk about that. This is Anansi Web Education, and we have David Arthur Granger, former president of the Cooperative Republic, with us as usual. Good night, sir. How are you?
Well, I'm good, and it's always good to be on this program to share views about matters of interest to our Guyanese, particularly our women and young people and people living in the villages. I'm good, and I hope these programs, Anansi Web Education, will continue to bring educated opinions and information to the Guyanese public at large. It's good being here.
Yeah, thank you. Always a pleasure to have you here as well. Tonight, we're going to take the high ground. Tonight, we are going to take the high ground, and I do mean the high ground. We're talking about marijuana. And this is something that we appreciate all of you sharing the link as well. And thank you all for joining us. If you're in Guyana, hope all is well, and outside of Guyana also. Marijuana cultivation, possession, trafficking, use are becoming widespread in spite of evidence of their dangerous consequences. Marijuana abuse, and mind you, here it is, the operative word is abuse, is linked to psychosis and mental ill health. Marijuana abuse is linked to drug dependency in 1 out of every 10 users. Marijuana possession or trafficking is the second most prevalent crime after murder. Marijuana possession or trafficking is responsible for the imprisonment of the majority of women. And let me repeat that. Marijuana possession or trafficking is responsible for the imprisonment of the majority of women. And if we have some of those women incarcerated currently at the New Amsterdam prison, we say goodnight to them. The other point is marijuana abuse is linked to destitution of 1 out of every 5 young persons owing to mental health, ill health caused by drug dependency. This is what we will be discussing tonight, which takes me to, of course, the web education today examines marijuana cultivation and abuse are messing up the lives of women and young people in Guyana. And we're here to answer 3 questions. The first question, President Granger, is why has the PPP administration failed to curtail marijuana cultivation and trafficking?
It is difficult to understand the mentality of the administration as a whole. I mean, over the last, since 1992, the PPP has been in office for 27 years. So There's nothing new that Guyanese could learn. And its attitude to, well, the whole drug trade, I suppose for a foreigner or a stranger, is quite strange. But definitely, we know where marijuana is cultivated, and we don't know why the PPP is acting in such a sluggish manner. Um, if it is serious about eradicating marijuana cultivation and trafficking. I can only say that the PPP has failed because they keep the security forces weak. We know that they're starting to use drones in law enforcement, but we know where the marijuana is produced, largely in regions 6, 8, and 10. If you look at the map of Guyana, there's a waste. I don't like to compare to a human figure, but Guyana has a waist. There's a large top and there's a large bottom and there's a narrow waist. And that narrow waist runs across three rivers, or parts of three rivers, Demerara, Essequibo, and Babis. So coming from Patara Seperuni across to the upper Demerara and into East Babis Quarantine, there's what they call the ganja zone. So we know where the ganja is being cultivated. And of course, when I say ganja, people talk about kaya, they talk about weed, they talk about pot. We know where the marijuana is being cultivated. And if a drone went up there, it can find out very quickly. I think some of my political opponents sent up a drone over my house because I was once accused of having a mansion. But when they sent up the drone, they said, oh, no, nobody builds houses like that nowadays. It's an old house. So they can send up a drone to find where marijuana is being cultivated. And I am confident that if there was a program to actually eradicate marijuana cultivation, a solution could be found very quickly. But I can only say that the PPP has failed to curtail marijuana cultivation trafficking because they're not interested in curtailing it. They're interested maybe in controlling it. Every week, the police anti-narcotics unit or customs anti-narcotics unit would go out there and burn down a few fields. The next week, they go out and burn down a few more fields. But after 30 or 40 years, they're not bringing marijuana cultivation under control. In fact, the figures show that marijuana cultivation is taking up more acreage rather than growing sweet potatoes and cassava. And because the other day you had to carry cassava into Region 9. But rather than spending time on cultivating food crops, they have made suggestions which indicate they are prepared to tolerate the cultivation of hemp and roses. What people need is food, and we're not getting that. So I am surprised. Well, I shouldn't be surprised, knowing the PPP as we all do, that marijuana cultivation is continuing. And what is responsible for the PPP's attitude? The PPP does not want to eradicate marijuana industry. Some people are getting very rich, and some other people are poor. The ordinary farmers are poor, but the people who are providing the tractors, the people who are providing the go fast boats, the people who are making contact with the overseas markets are not the poor farmers in the villages. They are rich entrepreneurs, and I can only assume that the PPP has failed to control or to eradicate the industry because it is a profitable industry for some people. So once it's profitable, you find the security system is has been weakened or has been it has been suffering from financial starvation. If you do not provide funds for KANU or the police, they can't do their work. We know the three regions. We know that under APNU, the country was divided into 10 police regions. So every divisional commander from Region 8, Region 10, and Region 6 knows that he has marijuana growing. And you must ask the divisional commanders what resources each one of them has to eradicate marijuana. And they will tell you that it's impossible. So the central government must take responsibility. The Ministry of Public Security, or what is called now the Ministry of Home Affairs, must take full responsibility for deliberately underfunding the drug eradication and law enforcement agencies in this country.
You know, before we move to the second question, you know, some folks out there might be asking, so under your 5 years of presidency, how did you guys approach the eradication of this and the whole issue of incarceration of women for possession of marijuana and so forth? What was your administration's approach?
Uh, well, it is the response is complex. For one, we didn't have the funds the present PPP administration. I'm not crying, I'm not complaining, but it's a fact. We just didn't have the sort of money they have now. Number two, we actually set up a serious anti-narcotics agency called the National Anti-Narcotic Agency. KANU cannot do it. KANU is suffering from birth defects. It was conceived weak and it was kept weak. And it's like PANU, the Police Anti-Narcotics Unit, is not capable, it's not resourced, it doesn't have the staff, it doesn't have the equipment to do this job. So our major response was to promulgate a National Drug Strategy Master Plan, to establish a National Anti-Narcotics Agency. And I receive reports every week. As far as the equipment is concerned, yes, we did not have sufficient equipment to go out into these areas, but we were in touch with some groups, and as you know, CARICOM had set up a commission to study the narcotics problem. But it was, I would say, rather inconclusive. It did not recommend the total eradication of the drug, and it was more concerned about protecting the economic security of small farmers to make sure that marijuana cultivation will not take over by rich entrepreneurs. I would say that the APNUFC administration did not go far enough towards eradicating. They were, in a coalition, there were different points of view. And I would say that there were elements in the coalition parties which were supportive of decriminalization. And we received reports at the level of cabinet against toleration, against decriminalization. And that was it. You can't go to parliament and some members of your partnership don't support the measures. In fact, this is exactly what happened in 2018. Technically, the APNUFC coalition only had 3 years from 2015 to 2018 because it was subject to a no confidence motion, which had the support of at least one member of our coalition. So we were really traveling on razor's edge there as far as policy is concerned. And I would say now, without letting secrets out, that there were some members of the coalition parties which did not support the total eradication of marijuana, and they were very tolerant to cultivation and production. Although we received advice from the Ministry of Public Health that marijuana abuse was problematic and should not be encouraged.
Certainly should not be encouraged. David Arthur Granger, former president of the Cooperative Republic of Guyana. As we move to the second question, and what measures should be taken to avoid the harmful consequences of marijuana industry? Of the marijuana industry.
The short answer would be total eradication. And it may seem to be an extreme measure, but if you did a search with the international news, you go to Singapore. Singapore execute persons who are convicted of trafficking in marijuana. The most recent execution was a person who was trafficking 1 kilo of marijuana, not cocaine, marijuana. Um, I don't know that there's a middle way. On the one hand, you can allow it, on the other hand, you must disallow it. What I know for sure is that the measures that are now taken by government are mostly ameliorative. They're mostly concerned with rehabilitation, not in prevention. I know there are lectures in the schools, and people talk to say no to drugs, but there's a tendency among adults and young people to experiment, and sometimes they get hooked. All marijuana is not the same. Some of it is very strong, and sometimes maybe drug traffickers lace it with other narcotics. And many people start off on marijuana and end up as addicts. It is addictive, and it is linked to psychosis. And some people, some people's lives are destroyed. So I would say the measures are inadequate. The measures are curative or ameliorative, and some people just do not respond to that type of treatment. They do not respond to counseling. And I am sure that many of our viewers at this program would be aware that, or would know families which have been broken up when a member becomes an addict. On the one hand, you can say that, of course, if the adults are alcoholics, they could also destroy the family. But sometimes young people who become alcoholic or become addicted to narcotics could end up with psychological problems, and they start to steal from their mother. They start to steal jewelry, and they sell it to get money to buy drugs. And eventually, some of them will end up living on the street. I know at least 2 families in which the mothers migrated to escape from their children, their sons who were addicted. It's not a good scene, and I think that the harm it does is greater than the benefit, if there's any benefit at all. Yes, there are benefits. The medical profession around the world.
Not to cut you, President Granger. I was going to ask you about because there's this argument that marijuana is being used for medicinal purposes, and the fact that some small amounts, like places in New York and other places, we see marijuana shops. We see that it's being legalized, certain amount. People are not convicted and so forth. But you did mention that there is another good side, supposedly, about the marijuana usage. But go right ahead, sir. Sorry that I had to interject there.
No, but you mentioned a good point there. But all countries are not the same. Now, the Netherlands or Canada or United States may have excellent law enforcement agencies. They may have good laboratories. They may have good medical professionals, and they are able to control the types or the quality of marijuana which is released for public consumption. But when you deal with some poor, small Caribbean countries which do not have those controls, and as a result of that, people are likely to consume narcotics which without supervision, without any regulation of the quality and the standard. So it is not fair to compare, the Netherlands with what happens in the backlands of Guyana, because the Netherlands has a well-regulated medical industry. And I do not think that the Guyana medical industry or the law enforcement agencies have the capacity to regulate marijuana cultivation production in the same way. Those countries, in those countries, the developed European countries, the industry is very strictly controlled. And I'm sure, well, I don't live in New York, but I'm quite sure that you just don't grow some weed in your backyard and go and put it on the market, like cucumbers. If it's going to be sold to the public, it has to pass certain standards to the Food and Drug Administration. And, I think sometimes in Guyana, the Food and Drug Administration has had to recall some conventional commodities, much as commodities which are, produced in the backyard. So I can say that it's difficult to compare, the two societies. And, the law enforcement agency in the Netherlands is quite different from the law enforcement agency in Guyana. I can tell you that. As you know, since 2020, the law enforcement agencies in Antwerp and in the Netherlands, have been picking up huge containers with cocaine coming from Guyana. And somebody in Guyana knows about it, knows about these semi-submersible vessels. And our law enforcement agencies don't see these things. But they can't get into, Antwerp and Rotterdam. So they're two different jurisdictions. And I do not think that our jurisdiction here in the Cooperative Republic has the capacity to regulate, medicinal use of marijuana. It is basically a free enterprise thing right now. And it's not good for young people. It's not good to the women.
This takes us, thank you so much for that. But this takes us, I know it's a very controversial topic today, very controversial indeed. From a personal standpoint, I can't say anything about the effects of marijuana because I have never in my entire life tried it, never did. And I'm proud enough to say that I've never done that.
Never inhaled.
Well, that's standing
American president.
Standing that was Bill Clinton that he never inhaled, or something to that effect. But I've never took a joint and pull it. I've never done any sort of drugs in my entire life, and that's one of the things that I can sit here and proudly say that I've never done. So I don't know what it feels like in your system. I've been around friends and people who pull in their joint and so forth, and that's as far as it got. But personally, inhaling it, no, it has never happened. And I can again say I'm proud of that, but I know that there are some Rastafarian brothers and sisters. They see this as something from a religious standpoint, and so oftentimes I stay clear of that sort of arguments with my friends or Rastafarian friends who have a different form of argument. Hence, this topic is very, very controversial. But you're looking in terms of the effects and so forth, young people and the impact, that sort of impact. Let's go now to the final question. Mr. Granger, it has here, how has the PPP administration's approach to the marijuana industry affected poor women and young people? And earlier we mentioned in terms of the incarceration, a lot of women, majority of the women are being incarcerated as a result of possession. And the possession, to be incarcerated for possession is very small in Guyana compared to other parts of the world, mainly the US and the Netherlands and so forth. And you've mentioned about control and law enforcement control and so forth. But my experience at downtown Camp Street, we call it the downtown Queen's College of Camp Street. The uptown is the actual Queen's College. That I have seen a lot of young people young people, first time offenders, being sent to prison as a result of just a small amount. And as you know, President Granger, in Guyana, all it takes is that small amount to give those young people or those women a criminal record. Now, the final question, I just thought I added that. The final question is, how has the PPP administration's approach to the marijuana industry affected poor women and young people?
It is evident. It is evident that the massive incarceration of women, many of them mothers, who are just hustling and to make a living. And as far as they're concerned, they sell a commodity that people are prepared to pay money for. But many of them end up in jail. What I would say, many of the big entrepreneurs, the people who finance the cultivation, production, and marketing, are not the ones who end up in jail. It's mostly poor women. Young people probably don't know what they're getting into when they take when they start to inhale, and they like it. It's pleasurable, and they continue to do it until it becomes habit forming. The PPP administration, to me, having been in government, is, I would say, reckless. To dismantle the National Anti-Narcotics Agency was an administrative error. And it is clear that KANU is being, or has been, and KANU is nearly 30 years old. I think it was approved in 1994 and might have been set up in 1995. But it is always underfunded. And from time to time, people have had to be dismissed. I think at one stage the head of KANU or the deputy head of KANU was interdicted or was dismissed. One deputy head was assassinated during the Troubles. So something's going on in KANU. It is certainly not the sort of organization which could eradicate illegal drugs at a national level. So I would say it is reckless to put the responsibility for narcotics eradication, if it is the aim of the PPP administration to eradicate it, to put it in the hands of an organization as poorly developed as KANU. It certainly needs a national organization, and it needs a national policy. It needs a Ministry of Public Security, which is serious about narcotics eradication. Right now, this seems to be a weekend sideshow. To send policemen up the rivers and just burn a few acres, and I think they feel they're impressing the United States Department of State that they are serious about eradicating narcotics. But it is all, cynically ornamental, just to keep the figures up so that they wouldn't get a bad report to say they're not doing anything. But what they're doing is certainly not enough. And I would say the approach is one that it tolerates the continued cultivation and production. It doesn't threaten. It doesn't seize property. It doesn't arrest the so-called big fish. And the people who suffer most are the women who are hustling to make a living, and the young people who are fooling around with drugs, and they don't know, they just want to feel good. They go to a party, and of course there are other drugs, ecstasy and so on, and they just want to feel good and have a good time. But their lives are being messed up. And for a mother, a woman, a mature woman, maybe in her 30s, to be separated from her children for 3 years, well, it means that the children's education and upbringing will also be jeopardized. I did take a sort of humane approach to release women very quickly, sometimes without having even served a year. Once it was for trafficking in small amounts. I didn't change the law because I didn't have the consensus that the law needed to be changed from within my government. But I did take the initiative to release women regularly, certainly at I think at the Independence celebration and maybe at Christmas, to go back home. Once they realize that they have committed a crime, go back, as Jesus said, go thy way and sin no more. So they were released and from prison, and some of them wrote thank you notes saying, I've learned my lesson. But it's not the way to eradicate a national crime. The problem is to provide an alternative. And I take the line that food security is more important than drug security. And if people were encouraged and given the assistance by central government to produce, sweet potatoes or cassava, the country would be more secure, the cost of living would be reduced, and we wouldn't have this type of criminal activity. Once you get young people and women involved in something they know is criminal, it can lead to other forms of criminality. And one of the forms of criminality is the corruption that is encouraged by law enforcement agencies. They know they caught somebody doing wrongdoing, and they're prepared to accept. I'm not accusing any particular person. They're prepared to accept to buy off or pay off. The result is that the women and children and young people continue to suffer. It is corrupting young people. It is corrupting the police force. It is corrupting the law enforcement agencies. And we must remove the source of that corruption. But right now, I think the suffering caused to women and young people is so great, there must be a definitive policy. And I would say we must eradicate the production and the cultivation production of marijuana. Guyana should be a drug-free society.
All right. President David Otto Granger's position on Guyana being a drug-free society. We can't disagree with that. There are some who are going to argue differently on the issue of cultivation of marijuana. And we understand, at least I understand, there will be differences of views on this particular matter. Some would argue that it's for medicinal purposes. Some would say it's religious, and so forth. I can understand, and I take a position of small amounts. And during your presidency, I think it was we've got to applaud you for taking the initiative to releasing women and young people. Albeit I am of the view, and I held that view then, that it should have been more, and not just around Christmas time or Independence time, because there are lots of young people who should have been given a second chance. And again, I commend your presidency for taking that initiative in ensuring that a lot of our young people don't get a bad rap, don't get a criminal record as a result of one little mistake in their lives for having a small amount of marijuana. And then they're placed into the prisons there with hardcore guys, and some guys not hardcore, but they're still there. And to give them that rap sheet or that record. And then there are women with small amounts and overcrowding the women's prisons there in New Amsterdam for just small amounts of possession of marijuana. I salute your administration for taking the bull by its horn, so to speak. But I am of the view that more should have been done as it pertains to releasing those women and releasing those young people, not just around Independence time, not just around Christmas time, but it should have been widespread. Just release them and say, look, be careful the next time around. We're not seeing that in this administration. We haven't seen that over the past 23 plus years they've been in office prior to 2015. And more should have been done indeed. But nothing is being done right now. Even during their elections campaign, their manifesto, they said they're going to do this and do that with the laws of small amount of marijuana possession, and that caused the incarceration of a lot of our women, first-time offenders, and even our young people. That's just my closing remarks, unless you have something else to add, Mr.
I understand your closing remarks. I don't want to restart the debate, but a government cannot get too far ahead of the population. And when it does not have law enforcement agencies um, or a criminal justice system to support that, it becomes futile. And I think the approach, even if you feel that the approach that was taken by the APNU AFC was inadequate, I believe that there needs to be more education, more alternatives, so that this happens in other countries, in Afghanistan, in Bolivia. If people had lucrative alternative farming options, or if they had, in fact, there is a food security problem in Guyana. And instead of talking about roses and Kemp, if we spoke about producing real food, people can live well. I'm concerned about women and villagers, and we don't have to produce drugs. Um, Many people speak about the marijuana industry. Some countries have made profit out of well-regulated industry, but Guyana needs to grow up in terms of its governance, grow up in terms of its administration. Look at the fiasco that occurred a few weeks ago with the Guyana Human Rights Report. We are not an efficiently managed country, and to burden it with regulating the drug industry would just lead to corruption and impoverishment of the people who we should be helping, women and young people. So I agree that more must be done, and maybe on another occasion we could tackle this topic again. But more needs to be done to give farmers and women an alternative, and we could live without marijuana. We can't live without food.
We'll leave on that high note.
I
we'll, leave,
know.
we'll leave on that high note. But thank you so much, President David Granger, for your time as always, and to our listeners all across Guyana and outside of Guyana. Thank you all so much for your time. We will definitely leave on that high note. Say, give my regards. Give my regards to your beautiful wife, our former First Lady of the Cooperative Republic of Guyana. And again, we will leave on this high note. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Good night.
Yeah. And again, good night to all of our listeners inside and outside of Guyana. God bless you.
Takapro, Nagabab, Yankee Bray, Sunday, even Dokapwa. Come and hear this sweet story that tell the people about life in the country. All day a back now, me now a come home. Inaga, Jackass yard for fetchy load. Cockle shy hand, bag over shoulder, running by his side, a Rexy and Rover. From the farm, them a come. So now go down, walk up the river. Some washing clothes, some folks are bathing at the water. Fisherman, they catch them a bring. From a canoe boat, man, them start offloading. Aymara, Kwakwari, Gale, Bakakum.